The most violent years Dodge City experienced were also its earliest, so it's no surprise that the first murder that happened in Dodge City was around the time the town began, in September of 1872. On June 17th, George Hoover and John McDonald opened the first saloon in Dodge. It was in a tent. Blocks of sod supported the bar. On August 15th, the charter for the Dodge City Town Company was made, under the direction of Robert Wright and Richard Dodge. In September, the railroad would reach Dodge City. Large stacks of buffalo hides had already been piled up. People were eager to be connected to the east by rail. When the first man who lost his life in Dodge was buried on a nearby hill, the town was a small and rough place. Two of the earliest descriptions of Dodge City, formerly known as Buffalo City, were published in the Leavenworth Daily Commercial newspaper of October 5th. Dodge, or Buffalo City, is a hamlet containing 300 or 400 souls, one drugstore, tinware and gunsmith shop, a furniture and several dry goods and grocery stores, and the usual number of saloons found in all frontier towns. Saturday evening, we reached Dodge, or Buffalo City, as it is called, a small town on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Road, 5 miles west of Fort Dodge. The city consists of about a dozen frame houses and about 24 tents, besides a few adobe houses. The town contains several stores, a gunsmith's establishment and barbershop. Nearly every building has out the sign, in large letters, Saloon. Dodge City's first newspaper, the Dodge City Messenger, published its first edition on February 26, 1874. For the history of Dodge City before that, we have to rely on mentions in other newspapers and personal accounts. There are 3 men who wrote about the first murder in Dodge City: attorney Mike Sutton, George Hoover, the first elected mayor of Dodge City, and Robert Wright, state representative. I will be going through their descriptions in order of date they were published. The earliest account is from Mike Sutton. During his life, Sutton served as county attorney, city attorney, and was a representative in the state legislature. Mike Sutton did not move to Dodge City until 1876, and so he was not in town when the first murder occurred. However, he would have heard first-hand accounts by people in the community. In 1879, the bodies from Boot Hill Cemetery were moved to Prairie Grove Cemetery, and it was decided that a school be built there. On February 4th, 1880, Mike Sutton gave a speech at the school, which gave this description. County Attorney Sutton referred to the fact that in 1872, hardly an attempt had been made to make a permanent settlement in this county. Buffalo and buffalo hunters were the only inhabitants, except Indians and Indian hunters. It happened in 1872 that a man was shot in a row within a few hundred yards of where the speaker now stood. His body lay nearly all day without anyone to care for it, when toward evening a grave was dug upon the identical spot where we have built our new school building. The grave thus made was followed by many others, until this beautiful hill became dotted with little mounds to the number of 25 or 30, and the hill itself was named Boot Hill, because nearly all the tenants of its graves died and were buried in their boots. Our next source is George Hoover, who set up the first saloon in town and was the first elected mayor. In 1903, Hoover gave an interview about the early days of Dodge City and had this to say about the first murder. The burying ground, known as Boot Hill, on the present site of the 3rd Ward Schoolhouse, was started in September 1872. The first man buried there was Blackjack, a Negro who was killed on the corner of Front Street and 2nd Avenue, Opera House Corner, by a gambler known as Denver. Blackjack was shot through the head and instantly killed. He was planted, as they called it, with his boots on Boot Hill, and it at all times carried that name. During the winter of 1872 and spring of 73, no less than 15 men were killed in Dodge City and were planted on Boot Hill. Hoover spoke about the Opera House Corner, but one of the streets named is incorrect. The Opera House Corner was at Front Street and First Avenue, not 2nd. This may have been an error on the part of the newspaper, as earlier in the article he describes the Opera House being on First Avenue. Betty and Kelly moved a frame building from Hayes and located on the corner of Front Street and First Avenue, on the present site of the Opera House in August of 1872. And finally, our third source comes from the book published by Robert Wright in 1913. Robert Wright was very influential in early Dodge City and would have been in town in September of 1872. He describes the first murder in Chapter 8, populating Boot Hill. The first man killed in Dodge City was a big, tall, black Negro by the name of Tex, and who, though a little fresh, was inoffensive. He was killed by a gambler named Denver. Mr. Kelly had a raised platform in front of his house, and the darky was standing in front and below in the street during some excitement. There was a crowd gathered, and some shots were fired over the heads of the crowds, when this gambler fired at Texas, and he fell dead. No one knew who fired the shot, and they all thought it was an accident, but years afterwards, the gambler bragged about it. Some say it was one of the most unprovoked murders ever committed, and that Denver had not the slightest cause to kill, but did it out of pure cussedness when no one was looking. Others say the men had an altercation of some kind, and Denver shot him for fear Tex would get the drop on him. Anyhow, no one knew who killed him until Denver bragged about it a long time afterwards, and a long way from Dodge City, and said he shot him in the top of the head just to see him kick. From these three accounts, we learn different details that form a more cohesive story. From Mike Sutton, we learn that the first person murdered was shot within a few hundred yards of Boot Hill, and that the body lay nearly all day without anyone caring to do anything, until finally in the evening a grave was dug and the body buried, meaning that the person was probably killed in the morning or early afternoon. From Hoover, we learn that the murder happened in September of 1872, that the person murdered was a black man by the name of Blackjack, that he was shot at the corner of Front Street and First Avenue. He was shot by a gambler known as Denver, that he was shot through the head and instantly killed. We get the most information from Robert Wright. Wright said that the man's name was Tex, that he was a little fresh but inoffensive, that he was killed by a gambler named Denver, that the shooting was done in front of a raised platform placed out front of Kelly's house. A crowd gathered, shots were fired over the heads of the crowd, and the man was shot, people in the crowd believing that it was an accident. Denver bragged about it years later and said he shot him in the top of the head just to see him kick. Let's start with the date. Hoover says the murder happened in September 1872. On September 5th, a different murder happened in Dodge City. A Topeka, Kansas newspaper ran the article, "Homicide at Dodge City, a notorious desperado killed." The story was about Jack Reynolds, a violent man bent on causing as much trouble as possible. Jack had shot a man at Raymond, Kansas, and threatened people on a train with his six-shooter. The conductor, named Jansen, tackled Jack and threw him off the train, but Jack would meet his end in Dodge. On Thursday last, he got into a quarrel at Dodge City with one of the track layers, who, without any ifs or ands, put 6 balls in rapid succession into Jack's body. The desperado fell and expired instantly, and thus the law-abiding people of the Southwest were rid of a terror. For Blackjack or Tex to have been the first person killed in Dodge City, then he would have had to die sometime before Jack Reynolds, September 1st through September 4th. Now, the location. Mike Sutton said the location of the first murder was within a few hundred yards of Boot Hill. George Hoover said it was at the Opera House corner, and Robert Wright said it was in front of Kelly's house. The Kelly referred to was James Dog Kelly, another influential citizen of Dodge City. Kelly was the second elected mayor and a prominent business owner. He moved to Dodge City in August of 1872. He brought with him a building that was assembled on the northwest corner of Front Street and First Avenue. This building had been taken apart and reassembled many times. It was first built in Leavenworth, then moved to Junction City, then to Ellsworth, then to Hayes, until it finally reached Dodge. It served as a combination saloon and restaurant named the Alhambra. It was in front of this saloon that the first murder took place in early September. Now, if you look at Google Earth and measure the distance between Boot Hill and the corner of First Avenue and Front Street, now Wyatt Earp Boulevard, you get over 300 yards, depending on where you place the marker on Boot Hill, which I believe follows Mike Sutton's description. Now let's talk about the name of the poor man who was the first killed in Dodge City. Hoover says his name was Blackjack, and Robert Wright said his name was Tex. Both of these were nicknames, meaning that he was probably not well known among the other people in Dodge City at the time. Just a few days afterwards, Jack Reynolds was killed, and we know his name, but he had developed quite a reputation in a short time. If his name was Tex, I would assume that at some point he lived in Texas. Quite a few people from Texas came to Dodge around this time, so that's not surprising. In February of 1873, a vigilance committee was formed in Dodge, and a person nicknamed Texas was killed. Shortly after dusk, a body of armed citizens visited the dance house of Tom Sherman, while another like party proceeded to that of Jack Elders. At Sherman's, a notorious character, Edward Williams, was shot and killed. And at Elders, Charles Hill, alias Texas, received like treatment. Were there two people killed in Dodge City nicknamed Tex and Texas within months of each other? Possibly. Or was Robert Wright confusing some of the names? Robert Wright wrote his book 41 years after the first murder took place. George Hoover gave his interview in June of 1903, 30 years after the fact. So my personal opinion is the name of Blackjack is more likely. Or maybe the first person killed in Dodge City had multiple nicknames, or he gave different names to different people. There's just not a lot of information to go on. I haven't been able to find any more information about the gambler named Denver who committed this heinous act. Denver got away with it to brag about it later. There's barely any information about Blackjack or Tex, but he didn't deserve to be shot from the back by a coward. The crowd in front of Kelly's saloon that morning in early September was celebrating something, and that was the last thing he experienced, standing in front of a saloon in a small town of tents and hastily built wooden buildings, surrounded by strangers who, for one reason or another, made it to the end of the railroad tracks. At evening, his body was dragged to the nearby hill, buried by people he probably didn't even know. This was the beginning of Dodge City's violent reputation in the West. And although that reputation was dressed up on the silver screen and the television screen, the violence was very real.